Welcome back. We are discussing Dr. Pervez Hoodbhoy's book, Pakistan, Origins, Identity and Future. And now we will be discussing part 3, postnatal blues. When he says postnatal blues, Professor Hoodbhoy discusses two essential foundational issues that Pakistan has faced and is facing. One was the breakup of East Pakistan, and the other is the ongoing tussle between the Baloch nationalists and the state of Pakistan. And he calls this, the chapter headings, he calls them stubborn angularities. And an angularity in the dictionary meaning is sharp corners, irregularities, or deviations. In the context of Jinnah's speech of 11th August of 1947, it means the humps and bumps of religion, of language, of culture, which Jinnah thought would simply disappear as Pakistan consolidated itself. All angularities, says the Quaid, would magically disappear and a unique Pakistani identity would reign supreme once the new state popped into existence. Jinnah hoped for a miracle. Unfortunately, miracles don't happen just because you want them to. So Dr. Saab, according to Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the Quaid, Pakistan was a nation by virtue of its religion alone. So why did the majority of this one nation decide to secede from the minority residing in West Pakistan?
Well, we know how things unfolded over the decades, but it was written pretty much into the very essence of Pakistan, into the very beginnings. Jinnah said very clearly that this is a miracle that Pakistan has been formed, and this country will remain, but he laid the foundations for its breakup very, very soon. He went to Dhaka 7 months after Pakistan comes into existence. That's a long time to visit the majority part of your country. And he goes there with a very unpopular message, as it turned out. He said that the state language of Pakistan will henceforth be Urdu, not Bangla, which is the language of the majority, but Urdu. And he said this in impeccable English, of course. And actually, a lot of people applauded because people had been used to applauding whatever Jinnah said. But when they were told what it actually means, that applause stopped and there was a riot at the end. The Bengalis are very particular about their culture and in particular about their language. So Jinnah did not retreat though. He went ahead and he made the same statement at several other places during his very first visit to East Pakistan. And when he came back, he thought the problem was solved. But then this was just the very beginning, because a feeling that the Bengalis were being colonized grew amongst them. And actually, one can understand that pretty easily. Those of us who grew up at that time knew that the Bengalis weren't actually thought of as equals. I mean, in my school, for example, Shaheryar, there used to be a couple of Bengali boys, and we were quite amused at the way that they spoke. Instead of saying Jalil, for example, they'd say Zalil. Okay, hilarious, isn't it? But they were short, they were dark-skinned, and we people I've always been told that good Muslims are those who are fair and tall, tall and can speak like we do, Urdu. So that prejudice was very much there. And as we discussed earlier, it's not just among Sindhis or Punjabis. That thing was there very much in UP. You remember we talked about
Sir
Syed Ahmad Khan, he
writing
said,
about it.
Writing about it.
And
Saying that the cowardly Bengalis, as soon as they hear a loud sound, they will go and dive under the table. So that sort of thing was made it very difficult for a nation to be held together with the fact that among the Bengalis there were relatively few people in the civil services, in the army. In the army they were very, very few. In the civil services, I think the statistics are there in my book, and perhaps you could even remind us of how many civil servants were there and how many people there were in important positions in government.
You write, Dr. Saab, that of some 101 Muslim members of the Indian Civil Service, the highly coveted ICS, and Indian Police Service at the time of partition, for example, only 18 had been from Bengal. Only 18. And 35 had been from areas that became part of West Pakistan, with the others coming from areas that had remained part of India. So mostly, largely from UP, I would imagine, these Muslims. So a total of 95 of the 101 had opted for Pakistan, thus making the Bengali members of the successor National Administrative Service in Pakistan a distinct minority. Even by mid-1950s, of 741 top civil servants, only 51 of 741, only 51, just about 11-12% were Bengali, none of whom had the rank of a secretary.
You know where I got this from? From the book by Hassan Zahir, The Separation of East Pakistan. Hassan Zahir, who I heard speaking, he was a friend of Iqbal Ahmad. He was there at the time that all this went on, 1971, but he had been stationed in East Pakistan long before that. And this is the tragic state of affairs then.
And you continue, of 41 joint secretaries, only 3 were Bengali. I mean, less than even 8-9%. Of 133 deputy secretaries, which is a much smaller rank, only 10 were Bengalis. So, and then with respect to the military, in 1955, there was only 1 Bengali brigadier, 1 colonel and 2 lieutenant colonels out of 308. So, I mean, you go on like this, it's a extremely sad and sorry picture of how, and I mean, this was not that they were, what had happened really, if we go in history and you write about it, that Bengal was very highly, where the sense of independence movements and rebellion had started, and they were deliberately kept out by the British, out of both as civil servants and certainly out of any military forces. The British relied on those people that had supported them in the mutiny, and they used those people. So it's not that there was any inherent inferiority in the Bengalis, they were deliberately kept out.
Yes, but you know what's really astonishing is that the Bengalis were ecstatic at the time of partition. They were celebrating with wild abandon. You could see the old videos from that time. You can watch them as they just celebrating, and that went on for only a little while before the reality started sinking in that, hey, the jute is being produced in East Pakistan, it's being exported, and it's the primary foreign exchange earner for the whole country, but all the benefits are going to the West. And as we've discussed, the entire civil service is is West Pakistani, the army is West Pakistani, and in fact the best lands in East Pakistan are being cultivated by Biharis, by Punjabis, by Muhajirs essentially, and that then creates this sense of being colonized essentially.
Yeah. I mean, forgetting the history that it is in Bengal, if first that the Muslim League gets formed, I mean, leave alone everything, that it is in Bengal and UP where the Muslim separation is spearheaded, and without Bengali sort of input and support, there would have been, in a way, no Pakistan. They were great. I mean, it produced leaders on that side. So this brings me to the question that there seem to have been then two fundamental problems at the time of partition. First, that religion was insufficient condition for nationhood. So, and second, that there was no arching vision or a game plan for what kind of a country Pakistan would be. We seem to have woken up one fine morning on August 14, 47, to find we've been handed over a country. And we have absolutely no game plan in a country first divided 1,000 miles away, then so heterogeneous, so pluralistic, with diverse cultures, diverse makeup, languages, and we have no plan.
And not only are they 1,000 miles away from each other, in between is hostile India. Right. Now, when a foreign journalist asks Jinnah, how is it that you're going to survive with East and West, here and India in between, he said, miracles happen. But they don't really.
Yeah. Wow.
So we're coming back to that old issue. Why was there not a plan for Pakistan? And we've talked about it before. Jinnah adamantly refused to reveal what he had in mind for the governance structure of Pakistan before partition, whether it was to be a federation or a confederation, whether it was to be a secular state or an Islamic state, what it would have at the various tiers of government, what would be the priorities, how would it be defended, and so forth. And I think basically at some point Pakistan would have had to pay the price. It did. It paid the price in 1971, but it could have paid it earlier, or certainly it would have paid it later than that. But it would have paid the price for there never being a plan for what it would be.
I mean, it seems to me that if you had looked at Pakistan and one had some idea of political science and history and how things turn out, you would have seen this diversity and you would have said, well, the only model that is going to work is a highly devolved, pluralistic model that fully recognizes and honors this diversity. What we did was completely the opposite. We centralized, we tried to create one unit called One Unit in West Pakistan, and we tried to impose a language on people who's had a great language and much older and a very rich language of their own. And we tried to completely centralize and control power from the top in a highly diversified country.
And most important of all, deny the fact that there are historically formed communities, you could say nations, that populate both the East and the West. Right. And that they're not going to be willing to subsume everything, remove their language, their history, their way of life, their culture, whatever, and be just part of the stream of just one stream. They want to retain their individual identities. They want honor, dignity, and equality.
Right.
They have to be treated well, otherwise at some point they're going to get angry. And this is something that the Pakistani state has not learned even up till this present point. In fact, provincialism, I think Liaquat Ali Khan, I've quoted him, has said that this is poison. Provincialism is poison for Pakistan.
Yeah, to your exact quote is that he declared in March 48, we must kill this provincialism for all times to come. Indeed, from the very beginning, provincialism has been denounced by the Pakistani state, and we must kill it. You see, I mean, it reminds me that if the referendum for Pakistan took place province-wise, right? There was not one, so there was a referendum in Bengal and in Punjab and then in WFP and in Sindh, and these individual units voted for Muslim League or for Pakistan, right? Which is very similar to how, in a way, United States came into being, which was the states voted for a central government, right? There, of course, they continued to have a highly devolved structure of governance where the real power lay at the village level, town level, and very then devolved, you know, by the time you get to the center, they are pretty not that concerned with what's going on in the provincial lives of the people in the United States. This is the model we should have had.
Absolutely. And this is what in fact inspired rebellion against the central government in Balochistan, but we'll talk about that later.
So not being an organic, historical or natural nation state, which Pakistan was not, our ruling elite were extremely insecure at the very inception. We had no clue how to create the missing national identity and national feeling. Had we given it some thought, as I said, we would have created a very devolved and a decentralized power structure. Instead, we did absolutely the opposite. We massively centralized this. So do you think we have learned any lessons? And you were just referring to that we haven't, but I want you to specifically address that any lessons from Pakistan's dismemberment in 1971. Have we learned any lesson?
Well, if you look at our school books, the only comment that they have to make about 1971 is that it was a Hindu conspiracy. It was the interference of the Indians into Pakistan's internal issues which led to its dissolution and dismemberment. If you ask for something very, very recent, I'll say it is General Qamar Bajwa, Javed Qamar Bajwa, who just before he retired commented on the 1971 and said that this was a failure of the political government. This was nothing to do with the army. So in effect, absolving the army of all that it did in that war and completely forgetting the fact that it was under army rule. It was Ayub Khan who from 1958 to 1968 was the President of Pakistan, the Chief Martial Law Administrator earlier on, and then it was General Yahya Khan. Now the common man in Pakistan blames this whole thing onto Yahya Khan being drunk and being a womanizer, and of course the Hindu conspiracies and all the nasty things that they do. Well, of course they do nasty things. They will do nasty things because you have made them your sworn enemy. So they took advantage, the Indians took advantage of Pakistan's internal weakness, and there was a civil war that was going on which was not initiated by India. It came entirely from internal causes, and yet today we absolutely refuse to admit that it was the fault of West Pakistan, the fault of the military. It was the military, the Pakistan army that was directly responsible for the genocide of Bengali Muslims. We are not on talking terms with Bangladesh. Bangladesh says, first apologize for what you did then. Right. And now the response from our side is, well, yeah, there were killings, but didn't you kill Biharis and Punjabis? Well, sure, there was killing on both sides, but it was disproportionate. The 10 million who fled into India from East Pakistan. That's a fact of history. Now, how many women were raped and how many children were born out of wedlock, out of this rape, I don't know. There are all kinds of wild figures around. But what we do know is that there is a war museum in Dhaka, which if you visit, somebody recently told me he had been there, and then a friend, and he said, I couldn't stand it. My tears were rolling.
Mm. See, long even before the massacre that happened on both sides, but certainly Pakistan state was the far more responsible because it was a state authority, was starting what you just had said about Mr. Jinnah's speech of 48, and then this disproportionate participation in civil service, in the army. Then in 1954, Jugtu Front beats, completely annihilates All India Muslim League and forms a government. There's already a sense of rebellion has already started. Awami League has already been formed. Sahih Shoreworthy is there. And then, of course, the 10 deadly years of rule of Mr. Ayub Khan, which makes them feel more isolated, more marginalized, using their jute income for, if you will, like one of the Bengali friends said, for paving the roads in Islamabad. They're taking the money of our jute money and paving the roads. I mean, all of that had happened till 71, which has nothing to do with India. I mean, India is totally absent from that. It is totally an internal misgovernance.
And the 1970 elections.
And the 1970.
What that established was Sheikh Mujibur Rahman as the most popular person in Pakistan, the most popular leader in all of Pakistan. It was not Zulfikar Ali Bhutto who won that election, it was Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. And had the Pakistan army and Mr. Bhutto agreed to accept the results of that election, well, history would have been different. I don't know how different it would have been, because after all, this was a situation of grave asymmetry.
Right.
And that asymmetry, would the West Pakistan army have permitted East Pakistan to have the greatest share of political power?
Right.
I have my doubts on that. Nevertheless, Pakistan would have continued further if Bhutto had accepted that. And if he had not got Yahya Khan on the path to crack down militarily on the dissidents over there.
So in the end,
you remember his famous statement when he came back. Once the army action had started,
he said, Pakistan has been saved. Also.
Thank God Pakistan has been saved.
I know. I think in this, Mr. Bhutto and the army unfortunately were on this one page. I think the fact that, as I said, yes, Mr. Bhutto had his own political reasons, but the man who held the gun was not Mr. Bhutto. The man who held the gun, who fired the gun, was General Yahya and his cronies. So it was really, it's very difficult to sort of decide or to apportion blame less to one or more to the others. I think they were in it together in the way they saw that.
Well, you could say Yahya Khan was Bhutto's gunman.
Okay, so we now, quoting, and before we end and move on to Balochistan, we wish Bangladesh well. You say in your book that Pakistan and Bangladesh are very different countries today, principally because they perceive their national interests differently. Bangladesh sees its future in human development and economic growth. Accordingly, it sets its goalposts at increasing exports, reducing unemployment, improving health, reducing dependence upon loans and aid, and further extending microcredit And you say water and boundary disputes with India are serious, and Bangladesh suffers bullying by its bigger neighbor on matters of illegal immigration, drugs, etc., but its basic priorities have not wavered.
Whereas the priority of Pakistan, our Pakistan, has been to counter India. We have fought 3 wars of choice against India: 1947, 1965, 1999. 1971 happened because it did. We didn't want it. That was an internal cause. But to fight these wars, you need a big army. And that's where our resources have gone. Ours has been a war economy sustained by mostly the United States, the Western powers, because we were their happy allies during the Cold War and then the Soviet invasion and so forth. If we continue to do so, well, we see where that's brought us. But in terms of the lessons learned from 1971, I am at a loss to see what in fact we have learned. It's as if we have simply shed excess baggage. We didn't really want all that stuff, and now it's gone, and so good riddance. That's the attitude of the Pakistani establishment. There is no concern for what we did to the Bengalis. There is no concern for the fact that the majority seceded from the minority. It's now like a forgotten chapter of history. That is unfortunately all that we have learned from 1971.
You say actually is that what we feel, or the rest of Pakistan feels, is that we anyway were the center and Bangladesh was some kind of a fringe colony. Periphery, on the periphery, and it's gone. Nothing really has changed for the center. What a sad state of affairs. Instead of deep self-reflection, instead of deep self-analysis, instead of transformational change, we have taken a tragedy and completely continued as we were, as if nothing happened.
And there is no recognition of the fact that you cannot ride roughshod over people's identities, their culture, their language, their ways of living. You cannot run Pakistan as though it is Punjabistan.
Okay. Well, on that note, we come to the end of the first stubborn angularity, as Dr. Pervez Hoodbhoy calls it, on East Pakistan. And in the next episode, we will be talking about the second stubborn angularity, Balochistan.